Welcome to the video. In this video we're going to continue our look at fixed wing craft. Now this is a plane called the Skysurfer, and this Skysurfer has come from firstpv.co.uk, so I need to say a very big thank you to those guys. This is a plane with about a 1.2 meter wingspan, just slightly longer, but it's relatively short and compact. It's only about 855 millimeters from front to back. Weighs around 830 grams and uses a 2213 1400 kV motor with an 8x4 prop at the back to fly with. Now this is a little bit different from any of the planes that we've flown before in that it has a dual tail configuration. So we have a nice big elevator at the back, but unusually it doesn't have any rudder control. It just has the elevator at the back and the ailerons on the wings. There is tons of room inside this plane, so we have this really interesting canopy at the front that allows you to mount your camera on there, GoPros, FPV cameras, everything. There's loads of room for that. Taking the top off the canopy and having a quick look inside, it is really roomy as well, so there's no problem putting a great whacking battery in here for very long flight times, and also there's room for things if you wanted to add Pixhawk, APM or another flight controller for autonomous control of this thing when it was flying. To put it together is relatively straightforward. When you open the box there aren't any instructions as such, but you can very easily figure out how it goes together. There's only 5 or 6 different parts. The first thing you'll notice is the body itself, and you can see here how big and wide this body is and how much room there is inside. So if you wanted to put current sensors, additional boards, GPS units, APMs, there's loads and loads of room in here, or even to put a couple of batteries connected in parallel to give you really long flight times. Then the next thing we'll pull out here are the wings. The wings come in 2 parts. They're held onto the top of the body by a couple of screws, and there is a nice carbon fibre rod that goes through the middle of them. There are these nacelles out in the middle of the wings that hold the spars that go back to that dual tail that we've just been talking about. Then there are the actual carbon fibre tubes themselves. The smaller one is that support for the wings, and the other 2 then are for the tail to all put it together. Now to put the tail together is what I did first. That's pretty straightforward. The spars already have the plastic pieces on the end, and it's just a case of installing the horizontal and vertical stabilizers. My tip would be install the elevator, the horizontal feather first, and don't install the rudders, the vertical stabilizers, until you have done everything else. The reason for that is it allows you to kind of slot everything home. Once you've done that, you are going to need to find the very long cable that comes as part of the kit, and this kit was good. It had all the cables that we needed, prop adapters and everything, so that everything went together really easily. There's a really long cable in there. What you have to do is feed that through one of the supports for the tail, and then there's space in the wing that you feed that through into the fuselage, and then you can plug it into the receiver. Once you've got all those cables routed, you need to hot glue what feels like fiberglass onto the top of that just for the strengthening as well. Then it's a case of putting the 2 wings together. Our recesses for the carbon fibre was about 1 centimetre too short, but a quick bit of twisting got that sorted out, and then popped it onto the top, and it's held in place with those 4 screws. Last thing I did then was install the vertical stabilizers. I just used a dribble of hot glue and it all went together great. Flying it is a lot of fun. Now, because it doesn't have a rudder, this is more of a bank and yank kind of flyer. So it's very much more like a wing. I found myself still putting in rudder control as part of my turns. That's just an old habit of mine. That didn't make any difference, but in terms of the flight, it was working very well. When it's flying, you actually find it has an awful lot of power. So I was easily pootling along at about 25 to 30% throttle, and it has more than enough power to climb a pretty steep angle if you want to get altitude pretty quickly. One thing I noticed when it comes into land, it's not a glider by any stretch of the imagination, so when you're coming in you will need to keep the power on until the very last minute. I've tried a couple of landings where I was trying to float it in, similar to what I've done with things like the Walrus and the Bixler and some of those other kind of FPV style planes that have a slightly thinner, longer wing. and if you come off the power too quick, then she will stall. Tip stalling isn't really a problem, it's quite well behaved. I don't know whether that's part of the tail assembly and how that all works, but it's a very smooth, easy to fly model, and hand launching is easy. It leaps out your hand and away you go. And to be fair, I didn't have to do an awful lot of trimming at all. Once all the control surfaces were kind of set and lined up with the wing as part of the standard setup, then it was great. We flew ours with a little 3-channel receiver. We used an X4R from FR Sky because we only need to have the throttle. The ailerons are controlled using a single connection. There's a little Y cable that comes in the kit, and then you have that really long elevator cable that goes all the way down one of the arms into the back. This thing does take crashes very well. We have had a number of little hiccups with it as we've been doing that landing, and we've had one big crash with it as well, and it has taken that abuse fantastically well. The one where it was a really hard crash, it ended up in quite a few pieces, but with a bit of hot glue it was back together in 20 minutes and flying as well as it ever did. Couple of things on the model though that I would probably like to have seen changed. There are two things. First of all is the lack of rudder control. That you can see on the rudders that there are cutouts here for rudder servos, and potentially they could have even put the rudders up in the body and had control rods running down by the side of the arms. The lack of a rudder for me for FPV is something that's a little bit missing. I do use the rudder in turns when I'm flying FPV and I missed it. Second thing is with the big 8-inch prop, the motor isn't mounted high enough at the back of the model for the prop to be clear of the ground. Now that presents two problems. One, when you're hand launching, you need to make sure that you get your hand down out the way as quick as you possibly can so that the trailing prop doesn't then make a mess of the tops of your fingers. And secondly, when you're coming into land, then you have to make sure you power off before the bottom of the model hits the grass, otherwise the tip of the prop is just getting destroyed as it gets dragged along, and if you were unlucky enough to land on something a bit harder, then the prop will be damaged, and that's a real shame because for the sake of moving everything up by about 3/4 of an inch, then that would have avoided all of those problems. But in summary, it's a plane that's worth looking at if you're interested in this kind of setup, you don't mind the lack of rudders, and you're looking for a frame with tons of space inside for electronics and payload, then this is definitely worth a look. Thanks again to firstpv.co.uk, and stay tuned for other videos coming up where we're looking at other fixed-wing models. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless 360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching, please like, subscribe, and happy flying.